Hello, this lecture is entitled The Romans, Jews, and Ben-Hur. The Roman Empire was one of the most successful empires in world history. Its legacy is everywhere, and it continues to offer important lessons on power, violence, slavery, and governance over people largely without their consent. Like other empires, the Roman Empire embodied the will of power as a relatively small number of soldiers ruled large areas with large populations. When the Romans began to enlarge their territory in the Mediterranean region, there was an increasing contact with Jews who resided not only in the Jerusalem region, but also in Egypt and Asia Minor. The Jewish people experienced much anguish, including at the hands of Jewish leaders working with the Romans. In 65 BC, a representative of Roman leader General Pompey was in Damascus to prepare for the Roman annexation of Syria. At this time, he got word of a dispute between two princes in Jerusalem. Although the Jerusalem kingdom was beyond the area that concerned the Romans, they became more interested. Jewish historian Josephus briefly wrote of the episode, quote, hearing of the position of affairs in Judea, Scarus hastened there to snatch what seemed a God-sent opportunity. End quote. Soon the Romans became embroiled in the intrigues of the rival Jewish princes. There was even bribery as various Jews sought the support of the Romans. 2 years later, Pompey gave military assistance to the Jewish prince Hyrcanus. Pompey and his staff sought to maintain advantageous political friendships, and what followed was the Roman conquest of Jerusalem. Pompey made Hyrcanus client ruler for the Romans. Rather than receiving the title king, Hyrcanus was confirmed as high priest. His rival, Aristobulus, was deported to Rome to live in internment. Other lower standing rivals were sold off as slaves. From this point, the Romans continued to intervene in Jewish history. Many Jews were resentful of the Jews, seeing them as violently opportunistic. Although Pompey did not plunder the temple, the Jews saw his entrance into the temple as an act of desecration. Josephus wrote, and not light was the sin committed against the sanctuary, which before that time had never been entered or seen. For Pompey and not a few of his men went into it and saw what it was unlawful for any but the high priest to see. By controlling Jerusalem, the Romans could secure the southern boundary of the Roman province of Syria. Pompey saw to the destruction of Jerusalem's city walls, and Roman taxation began. The Jews also lost control of Samaria and Gaba. These became independent enclaves of the province of Syria. Historian John Kernan explains that Pompey categorized the region geographically, ethnically, politically, identifying individuals, factions, and communities with which he was prepared to work. But the consequences for Jewish leaders were stark. The Jewish kingdom was dismembered as the Romans established security of the southern border of Syria. Roman arrangements received modifications. The Roman consul, Marcus Crassus, demanded more money from the Jews, and he robbed Jewish temples. However, Julius Caesar gave the Jewish leaders more territory, notably the port of Joppa. He clearly showed respect for the Jews. For example, he acknowledged the Jews' sabbatical year and prohibited Roman troops in the region during the sabbatical year. In the year 37 BC, the Romans named Herod king of Judea, and he became master of Jerusalem. He executed 45 political leaders who were his opponents and took control of the aristocrats. As historian Julius Wellhausen writes, he writes how Herod appointed to the most important posts obscure individuals of priestly descent from Babylon and Alexandria, and thus replaced with creatures of his own the old aristocracy. To deter the possibility of any independent authority challenging his power, he abolished the life tenure of the highly priestly office and brought it completely under control of the secular power. The Sadducees, the party of high priests and aristocrats, lost status. They were driven out of their native sphere, the political, into the region of theoretical and ecclesiastical discussion, where they continued, but on quite unequal terms, their old disputes with the Pharisees. Herod eliminated other threats to his power, including family members. To the Jewish people, Herod was a client of the Romans. He was at best a nominal Jew who was unpopular with the people. However, he was conscious of both domestic and external threats. Cleopatra and the Egyptians were a problem, and he lost several provinces to Antony. But in the end, Herod gained the support of powerful Romans. The aim of the Romans was to secure a supply of revenue while protecting their territorial interests. They expected Herod to be a Roman solution to Judea. Viewed by the Romans as a capable warrior, Herod earned his Roman citizenship by his assistance to various generals. He had remarkable charisma that won over both Roman and Jewish leaders, and he had a close relationship with Emperor Augustus. Josephus wrote that there was no other after Agrippa whom Caesar held in greater esteem than Herod, while Agrippa gave Herod the first place in his friendship after Caesar's. And Augustus also associated Herod with the procurators of Syria, instructed them to obtain Herod's consent to all their actions, end of quote. Herod is also called Herod the Great because of his vast building accomplishments: palaces, citadels, theaters, hippodromes. He sought luxury and grandeur, and his royal residencies served a political purpose. They were fortresses where he could plan in secret. His centrally elaborate palace was in Jerusalem. Herod's most famous project was the temple in Jerusalem. It was a huge improvement to the smaller temple built by the returned exiles from Babylon. It was built in the middle of an enormous sanctuary that had large colonnades. Josephus provided many details. The temple had doors also at the entrance and lintels over them of the same height with the temple itself. They were adorned with embroidered veils with their flowers of purple and pillars interwoven. Over these, but under the crown work, was spread out a golden vine with its branches hanging down from a great height, the largest and finest workmanship of which was a surprising sight to the spectators to see what vast materials there were and with what great skill the workmanship was done. He also encompassed the entire temple with very large cloisters, contriving them to be in a due proportion thereto. and he laid out larger sums of money upon them than had been done before, till it seemed that no one else had so greatly adorned the temple as he had done. End of quote. In many other paragraphs, Josephus goes on and describes other details of the construction. Another impressive project was the fortress of Herodium, built 12 kilometers south of Jerusalem in the hills facing Arabia. Josephus wrote, Herod encircled the top with round towers, filling the enclosed space with a palace so magnificent that in addition to the splendid appearance of the interior of the apartment, the outer walls, copings, and roofs had wealth lavished on them without stint. At very heavy cost, he brought in an unlimited supply of water from a distance. End quote. Herod chose Herodium as his burial site. Herod nurtured his relationship with powerful Roman leaders. Two cities he rebuilt were named after Augustus. The city of Samaria Sebast included a temple built for the worship of Augustus. The city of Caesarea Maritima was Herod's second largest engineering feat. It had a theater, a hippodrome, a pagan temple, and a promontory palace. He built other pagan temples throughout his kingdom. These projects were important for all citizens. For example, the water supply in Jerusalem demanded attention, and Herod constructed an aqueduct that brought water from springs located south of Bethlehem. Herod's building projects were not enough to earn support of the Jews, who felt he favored non-Jewish peoples. Herod had the support of some of the aristocrats, the higher ranking Jews, but the ordinary masses were unsupportive of Herod. His building of pagan buildings was a case in point. The Jews rebelled when he dared to place a Roman eagle at the entrance of the temple in Jerusalem. Historian Ivor Davison writes, beneath the veneer of his success, his regime was marred by a great deal of violence and intimidation, and his own household was torn apart by intrigue and feuding. Herod had difficult relations with his family. Josephus described how he disposed of his wife. Once Miriam, his second wife, a Hasmonean princess, had been disposed of, the king's desire for her burned still more strongly. For his love for her was not passionless, nor such as arises from familiarity, but in its very earliest beginnings had been a divine madness. And even with freedom of cohabitation, it was not restrained from growing greater. But now, more than ever, he seemed to be a prey to it, as if by a kind of divine punishment for the death of Miriam. He would frequently call out for her and frequently utter unseemly laments. He should devise all kinds of distraction possible and arrange banquets and parties for himself, yet none of these would help. End of quote. These are the words of Josephus. Herod died in 4 BC. His kingdom went to his 3 sons, but his son Archelaus, who received the territories of Judea, Samaria, and Idumea, was a bad and cruel leader. He called in the Roman army to suppress an uprising by Jews. The Romans crucified 2,000 Jews. In AD 6, the Romans removed Archelaus from power and made his territory a Roman province. The Romans had assimilated many Eastern religions, but left Judaism essentially alone. They had a tradition of acceptance of new religions, but there was always room for new gods alongside the traditional Roman ones. But Jews were monotheistic and were unwilling to adopt the same attitude at first. Nonetheless, the Romans allowed some religious freedom for the Sadducees and the legalist Pharisees. The Sanhedrin, the supreme council led by a high priest, retained official authority with most internal affairs and anything related to Jewish law. On the Sabbath, Jews do not have to appear before a magistrate. The Romans made sure that copper coins minted in the region had no image of pagan deities. However, most Jews continued to resent the Romans, especially due to the large military presence and heavy taxation. The Jewish upper class enjoyed beneficial relations with the Romans, but much of the Jewish population saw the occupying force as repressive. Ivor Davison explains that the Romans were a menace to be grumbled about, but in a reality about which little could be done immediately. The best course was to spring to the essential hope that God would in time grant deliverance and the restoration of Israel's fortunes. End of quote. After the reign of Augustus, Jewish-Roman relations worsened. The period of Emperor Tiberius saw setbacks. For example, the Romans conscripted several thousand Jews for military service in AD 19. The Emperor Caligula, who followed Tiberius, was an evil leader who destroyed people and took their wealth. He asserted his own authority, his own divinity, expecting great honors from everyone. The most holy of all temples was the temple of Jupiter, and he called himself the brother of Jupiter. Josephus wrote, when Caligula had a daughter born, he carried her into the Capitol and put her upon the knees of the statue, and said that the child was common to him and Jupiter, and determined that she had two fathers. But which of these fathers were the greatest? He left undetermined. End of quote. The Jews resented any hint of the cult of the emperor. Romans' relations with the Jews were further complicated by the actions of the zealots, who periodically led armed rebellions against the Romans. The film Ben-Hur, this is the 1959 version, captures the conflict between the Jews and Romans during the early Roman Empire. The image of ancient Rome as an evil empire looms large. A stunning success with both critics and moviegoers, Ben-Hur won 11 Academy Awards for Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor in a Leading Role, Best Actor in a Supporting Role, Best Cinematography, Best Art Direction, Best Costume Design, Best Sound Recording, Best Film Editing, Best Special Effects, and Best Dramatic or Comedy Score. The film is based on the 1880 novel Ben-Hur, A Tale of the Christ, written by General Lew Wallace. In the late 19th century, the novel was the second best-selling book in America after the Bible. According to scholar Martin Winkler, the 1959 film version portrays the tyranny of the Roman Empire as comparable to Nazi Germany. The villain, Messala, a Roman leader who had been a boyhood friend of the Jewish prince Judah Ben-Hur, carries out sinister policies to stamp out any Jewish opposition to Rome's power and greatness. The film begins with a voiceover that introduces the themes of dominance, promise, and freedom. Judea, for nearly a century, has lain under the mastery of Rome. The old city, i.e. Jerusalem, was dominated by the fortress of Antonia, the seat of Roman power, and by the great golden temple, the outward sign of an inward and imperishable faith. Even while they obeyed the will of Caesar, the people clung proudly to their ancient heritage, always remembering the premise of their remembering the promise of their prophets that one day there would be born among them a redeemer to bring them salvation and perfect freedom. End of quote. Early in the film, Judah and Messala share fond memories of their early close friendship. Their joyful reunion, however, is short-lived. Messala explains to Judah that the emperor is ready to crush any Jewish rebellion. Be wise, Judah. It's a Roman world. If you want to live in it, you must become part of it. It was fate that chose us to civilize the world, and we have. Messala informs Judah of the emperor's divinity. He is God, the only God. He is power, real power on earth. Messala taunts Judah. You are a conquered people. You live on dead dreams. You live on the myth of the past. The only reality of the world was Rome. Judah's response was an indictment of Rome. Rome is evil. Rome is an affront to God. Rome is strangling my people and my country, the whole world, but not forever. I tell you, the day Rome falls, there will be a shout of freedom such as the world has never heard. The relationship between Messala and Judah is broken. Judah could never accept the totalitarianism of the Romans. He was not a Herod type of leader who allied with Roman authority. Later, Judah's mother offers much wisdom to Judah. Let us give the Romans their due. They are superior to us, but only in making war. In no other way do we suffer by comparison with them. History proves otherwise. We were a great nation blessed by God when Rome was still a village in the swamps of the Tiber, debasing itself before pagan idols. Our prophets have promised we will be free. They spoke the word of God. There were times when the Jewish people forgot God, but Rome has never known him. But Messala appears to have the last say when the Romans arrest Judah and his family for accidentally causing a roof tile to hit the new Roman governor while he paraded through the city on horseback. Messala discovered that Judah's house had loose roof tiles, but he makes no effort to defend Judah, who became a slave on a Roman ship. Messala explains, to show leniency is to encourage rebellion. The Jews must be taught a lesson. You and your family are that lesson. Hope was gone, and it appeared that Judah would die as a Roman slave, and his mother and sister would experience a horrible future. But Judah's banishment to a Roman galley for life takes a different turn. While in transit across the desert, the thirsty and exhausted Judah falls to the ground and prays to God for relief. Against the commands of the brutal Roman soldiers, one man gives Judah a drink of water. The Roman soldier begins to assault the man, or at least thinks about assaulting the man, but he stops. He is unable to carry out his actions. The man who assisted Judah is Jesus. Judah survives and spends years rowing Roman ships. The Roman leader, Quintus Arrius, takes note of Judah. In a sea battle, Judah saves Arrius and becomes a Roman citizen. In Rome, having earned his freedom, Judah becomes a champion chariot racer and a popular and respected citizen. However, Judah will not gain true freedom until he encounters his enemy Messiah in Jerusalem and discovers what happened to his mother and sister and learns more about Jesus. Towards the end of the film, Judah sums up the totalitarianism of the Roman Empire. Rome made Messiah evil and cruel. Rome destroyed him and my family as it destroys everything. Messiah was not my enemy. Rome was my enemy and always will be. The Romans themselves justified their empire. Roman poet Virgil wrote, "You Roman, remember by your empire to rule the world's peoples, for these will be your arts, to impose the practice of peace, to be sparing to the subjected, and to beat down the defiant." But what was the guilt of the so-called defiant? Many of them burdened with hopelessness. The real-life Judah Ben-Hurs and other Jews of lesser status simply wanted a life without Roman coercion. They could not compromise like Herod. The Jewish people desired a society where all could experience freedom. Even the Jews who avoided enslavement often experienced the collateral damage of Roman dominance by powerful leaders demanding obedience. The Ben-Hur film illustrates the despair that burdened the Jewish people. However, in the end, hope and true freedom triumphs. Thank you.